Who the hell is Lovecraft? How did he become one of the most influential genre writers of all time? And what legacy does he leave behind? The contemporary cosmic horror, gothic and weird fiction landscape would be unrecognisable without him. But beyond the stories, Lovecraft has smothered pop culture in a palpable shroud of terror. But every mythos has an origin. To understand the man and his imagination, we must first delve into the dark depths of his formative years and understand his influences. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born on the 20th of August 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island. Legend, let's say cosmic forces, dictate that he had to be born in the heart of New England, the home of witch trials, spooky fishing towns, haunted forests, and devil-worshipping cults. We are all a product of our environment. Maybe Howard would have grown up to be a weird cowboy novelist if he was born in Arizona or California, the frontier land full of hopes and dreams. Lucky for us, his corner of America was a warped reflection of the late Victorian era, cold and damp, its footholds infested with memories and connections to the old world. The scene, at least, was set. He actually had a rather privileged start in life. His mother was of aristocratic stock, his father was a businessman. But then the dominoes started to fall. Before the age of 3, his father suffered from syphilis-induced madness and was locked up in a lunatic asylum. They never saw each other again. He and his mother moved in with his grandfather, a wealthy man who loved to tell ghost stories and surrounded Howard with books and journals. Crippled by anxiety as a child, he avoided school and social interaction as much as possible, educating and distracting himself with classic literature and poetry. His beloved grandfather died when Howard was a teenager, turning his life upside down again. He contemplated suicide, had a mental breakdown of his own, and retreated further into his own mind. By his mid-20s, he was severely depressed, emotionally estranged from the toxic relationship with his mother, penniless, rudderless, weird and lonely. Put all of that into a cauldron, the pain, the self-inflicted education, the world outside the window, and I would be amazed if he didn't turn out the way that he did. Lovecraft's professional and artistic path meandered somewhat at the start of his career. While he toyed with the idea of becoming a scientist, a serious journalist, or working in politics, he never found that spark to drive him further. Instead of committing to a specific vocation, he would commentate prolifically in the form of poetry, debate papers, and hundreds of letters to the editors of newspapers and magazines. This attracted the attention of Edward F. Dass, the editor of the United Amateur Press Association, who invited him into the organisation. Now Lovecraft, who surely would have continued to write in his spare time anyway, was getting paid to do what he loved. He emerged further from his shell, even becoming a somewhat respected and known member of local literary society, a medium fish in a small pond. His friends and colleagues persuaded him to explore writing fiction a bit more. They were impressed with his poetry and were intrigued to see what he could produce in the longer form. So in the summer of 1917, he started working on a few short stories, including Dagon. It turns out that that horrific, tortured, putrefied, haunted vision that would one day make him a posthumous icon was there all along. This is a pivotal moment in Lovecraft's life. He was in the right place at the right time to draw on the darkness of his past and feed off the inspiration of the literature he consumed growing up. He cites Edgar Allan Poe as a major influence, his god of literature, and much of his early work is an homage to Lord Dunsany's technique and style. Without these two, I don't think we would have the Lovecraft that we recognise today. Poe showed him how to take an existing genre and twist it into something new, something darker, while Lord Dunsany refined the way Lovecraft approached atmosphere and prose. Then more tragedy struck. His mother, just like his father and indeed himself, had a mental breakdown and was committed to the same insane asylum where his father ended up. She died 2 years later. But Lovecraft was either numb to this flavour of misery by now, or just better at channeling his grief. He didn't fall all the way back into depression. He worked, he hobnobbed, he met a woman, he got married, and he moved to New York City. In 1924, he has companionship, his first stories are getting published, he lives in the most vibrant city in the world. What could possibly go wrong? Almost everything. His wife became ill and couldn't work. The couple struggled for money. Then she became well enough to work, but took a job in Cleveland, leaving Lovecraft all alone in the city, which he hated, and which provoked an ugly reaction. You don't have to dig too deep to find racism in Lovecraft's work. Most of it is allegorical, but some is overtly displayed. His time in New York exacerbated his warped opinions. He was surrounded by immigrants and genuinely saw them as second-class citizens. This went even further in his mind and manifested as a clinical phobia. New York brought out the worst in Lovecraft. It stripped him of love, luck, and wealth. He lost over 40 pounds of body weight in less than 2 years. It chewed him up and spat him out. He returned to Rhode Island in 1926. He never saw his wife again. What followed was the most productive, legacy-inducing purple patch of Lovecraft's career. The Dunwich Horror, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Colour Out of Space, and At the Mountains of Madness were all written in the last 10 years of his life, after the world had given him a good kicking. So far, this is a story of a life of upheaval and fragmented foundations. But throughout his rollercoaster existence, Lovecraft built a solid circle of friends and correspondence. The Lovecraft Circle was a group of like-minded writers who exchanged ideas, influenced, encouraged, and edited each other's work. Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, and of course Robert E. Howard were among the most well-known writers in the gang, regularly getting published in Weird Tales and beyond. They had the freedom to borrow, reimagine, and plant stories in each other's worlds, attaching an artistic scaffolding to an already established mythos. There was one particular cosmic entity that cast the longest, darkest shadow. Elegantly and poetically, it was present at the very start of Lovecraft's career, just waiting to be discovered. Its gravity so huge, it pulled in its creator and his circle of friends, its grip as strong today as it ever was. Lovecraft's most iconic, most celebrated and most referenced work is the Call of Cthulhu. It's the linchpin to his interconnected world of ancient cosmic horror. It was the first story he wrote upon his return to New England in 1926. Whether New York was holding him back or Providence reignited his imagination matters not now. The Cthulhu mythos dominated his writing until his death. There are breadcrumbs of this dark force lingering in the background of much of his career, going all the way back to Dagon in 1917. I think it reflects the manner of horror that he was projecting. Lovecraft protagonists don't learn that they are cosmically insignificant. Instead, they already know it, but have it confirmed through an event. The Call of Cthulhu confirms what Lovecraft was writing all his life. But it's more than just an idea or a mystery lurking in the basement of the human mind. What makes Cthulhu the rock star of the weird is a massive alien monster with giant tentacles and wings. Lovecraft successfully collides the metaphorical dread of creeping death and madness with the very practical horror, scaring us on every level of reality. However, he wasn't a fan of his own work. He needed encouragement from his circle of friends who loved it to give it a push and get it published in Weird Tales. Then this collective art consortium idea comes into play and builds the mythos. During his lifetime, members of the Lovecraft Circle expand the universe, but still stick to the original Lovecraft core idea. After Lovecraft died in 1937, fellow writer and friend August Derleth took the idea of this concept and ran with it, coining the phrase Cthulhu mythos, setting up Arkham House Publishing with the main goal to keep the Lovecraft bibliography in print and writing new stories to build on the original vision. Some say Derleth exploited Lovecraft's legacy, borrowing too heavily to get his own work noticed, often missing the point of the amoral universe of the original texts. Others say that Lovecraft would have simply faded into obscurity like so many other genre writers without the enthusiasm and intervention of his old friend. That all happened about a century ago. Lovecraft died of cancer on the 15th of March, 1937, just 46 years old, in the same town that he was born, Providence, Rhode Island, New England. Forever a proponent of the macabre, he documented his own illness until the pain was so acute he couldn't even hold a pen. He wasn't a complete failure in his own lifetime. He was, after all, published many times and was just about able to support himself through his art. But he did die a poor man, his stories regarded as great only by his small circle of peers. Even the good work of August Derleth and Arkham House failed to convince the public at first, but they persevered, translated his works into many languages, until at last the world started to wake up to Lovecraft. Maybe America and Great Britain were just too obsessed with the golden age of science fiction, and weird fiction hadn't yet reared its ugly head. It was actually the French that first regarded Lovecraft as the successor to Edgar Allan Poe. Book sales accelerated and word spread around the world. In the 1960s, his work was reissued in America and collided head-on with the new wave of cinematic horror. It seemed like every prominent, cool author, artist, filmmaker, visionary from the 1970s onward pointed to Lovecraft as their inspiration. The snowball continued. To this day, we are seeing straight film adaptations, works indirectly inspired by, and whole careers that simply wouldn't be the same without him. Stephen King's multiverse fits right on top. Even the logo for the channel that you're watching right now has that look. Before I even read any of his stories, I was in love with cosmic tentacles. May I be bold and say that his legacy is tied to a cross-genre aesthetic that we see once in a handful of generations. Regardless of the skill of his prose or the enjoyment that you get from his books, Lovecraftian is more important than Lovecraft himself. It's beyond the zeitgeist impact of someone like George Lucas. It's beyond the popularity of J.K. Rowling. It's beyond the foundational importance of H.G. Wells. I think his vision is in the pantheon of Ians, Shakespearean, Dickensian, Orwellian, Lovecraftian. Even if you haven't read any of his books, you know exactly what it is. It's in the blood of the culture.